The morning of my wedding, my mother told me I should have picked a different dress. Not because it wasn't beautiful, it was. Ivory satin, off-shoulder, the kind of dress I'd dreamed about since I was 7 years old cutting pictures out of bridal magazines. But she stood in the doorway of the hotel suite we'd rented for getting ready, looked me up and down and said, "It's a lot of dress for someone in your situation." That's what she called it. Like my life was a weather event, an inconvenience, something to be managed around. I should back up. My name is not important. What matters is this. I am 31 years old. I have cerebral palsy affecting my left side, as a cane on bad days and a wheelchair on worse ones. I have a master's degree in occupational therapy. I have a job I love, an apartment I pay for myself, and a man who looked at me on our third date and said, "I want to know everything about you," and meant it. His name is Cade. No, wait. Not Cade, I'm getting ahead of myself. His name is, I'll call him my husband now, because that's what he is. That's what he became on the day this story ends. But before the ending there was a long, painful middle. My sister is 2 years younger than me. She is, by every conventional measure, the family star. 5'8", naturally thin, finishing her second year of law school, engaged briefly to a man our parents adored before calling it off for reasons she never fully explained. My parents have always moved around her like she was the sun, and the rest of us were just trying not to get burned. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I said it with bitterness for a long time. But somewhere around my 28th birthday, sitting alone in my car in a hospital parking lot after a particularly bad flare-up, I decided that I was done auditioning for my own family's approval. Done rearranging myself to fit into spaces they'd never quite made wide enough for me. What I didn't know was that my decision didn't stop them from having opinions. My husband and I got engaged 14 months before the wedding. He proposed on a Tuesday, which everyone said was strange, but it was the anniversary of the day we met, and he said he didn't want to wait for a weekend. He got down on one knee in my kitchen while I was making pasta, and the water was boiling over, and the smoke detector went off twice. It was perfect. My parents met him for the first time 3 weeks later at a dinner my mother organised at their house in the suburbs. She made her good roast, which she only makes for people she's trying to impress, and I thought that was a good sign. It wasn't. My father shook his hand for too long and then spent most of dinner asking him questions about his income, his 5-year plan, his family background. My husband answered everything patiently. He's good at patience. It's one of the things I love about him. My sister arrived late, changed out of whatever she'd been wearing into something that showed more shoulder, and sat across from him for the rest of the night with a particular kind of attention I recognised from childhood. She used to do the same thing with my friend's older brothers. A focused, deliberate interest. Like she was taking inventory. I noticed. I filed it away. I told myself I was being paranoid. The months that followed were full of small things I kept filing away. My mother asking, twice, whether my husband had ever dated someone more like your sister. You know, someone without your complications. My father pulling him aside at Christmas and asking if he'd thought this all the way through. My sister texting him directly. She got his number from my mother, who had it from an emergency contact form, to say she'd love to grab coffee and get to know her future brother-in-law better. He told me about the text immediately. He showed me his phone. He said, "I'm not going, but I want you to know it happened." I loved him more in that moment than I had in any moment before it. I confronted my mother about giving out his number. She said I was being oversensitive. She said my sister was just being friendly. She said, and I will never forget the specific flatness in her voice when she said this, "You know how people are when they meet him. He's exactly the kind of man your sister always imagined for herself." I stood there in her kitchen holding a dish towel and I thought, she didn't say the wrong thing by accident, she meant every syllable. The bridal shower was in April. My mother's house, backyard, yellow tablecloths, the aunts I only see at milestones. It was lovely in the way that things can be lovely and painful at the same time. My sister gave a toast. It was 3 minutes long. She mentioned my husband by name 4 times. She mentioned me twice. Afterward, one of my cousins, the one who's always said whatever she's thinking since we were kids, the one who once told our grandmother her cooking was mediocre to her face, leaned over and said, "Your sister's toast sounded like she was the one marrying him." I laughed like it was a joke. She didn't laugh back. The week before the wedding, my mother called to tell me she had concerns. I sat down. My husband was in the next room. I could hear him laughing at something on television, this comfortable laugh that had become the sound of my home, and I held the phone and waited. She said she was worried the wedding was too big. She said she was worried about the optics of the ceremony. Specifically, the aisle. She said, and again I am quoting her directly because these words burn themselves into my memory, People will be watching you walk and, you don't want to make it harder than it has to be. She meant my cane, she meant my gait, she meant, I am embarrassed by you in front of our extended family. I told her I planned to walk down the aisle exactly as I am with my cane, and that was not a discussion. She made a sound I'd grown up hearing, this low exhale that meant she was disappointed but had decided to let it go for now. I hung up and sat in the kitchen for a long time. My husband came in, saw my face, and didn't ask. He just put his hand over mine and stayed there until I was ready to talk. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant downtown that my in-laws helped pay for. They are generous, uncomplicated people who welcomed me into their family with an openness that still sometimes makes me cry to think about. My mother-in-law hugged me when we got engaged and said, "We are so happy. He's been waiting for someone like you." I didn't know what to do with that. I'd never been described as someone worth waiting for. My family arrived late to the rehearsal dinner. All of them, together, like they'd coordinated. My sister had changed clothes twice, I found out later. She'd texted my maid of honor asking what she was wearing, which my maid of honor told me about, wide-eyed, in the bathroom. My sister sat next to my husband at the table, not next to me. We had a seating arrangement and she moved her place card. I didn't notice until we were already seated and the appetizers were coming out. By then, making a scene felt worse than letting it go. She talked to him all night. Not exclusively, she talked to everyone, she's good at that, she's always been the one who can work a room, but there was something directional about it. Something with an agenda. At one point she touched his arm while laughing, and left her hand there 3 seconds longer than any laugh requires. My maid of honor, sitting beside me, put her hand on my knee under the table. Just to let me know she'd seen it too. I got through the dinner. I got through the drive home. I held it together until my husband and I were alone in our apartment, shoes off, sitting on the kitchen floor, because sometimes the kitchen floor is the right place to fall apart, and then I told him everything. The texts, the toast, the phone call about the aisle, his arm at dinner. He listened to all of it. Then he said, "Nothing your family does or doesn't do changes anything about tomorrow, but I need you to know I see it, I see all of it, and I need you to know I'm not confused about who I'm marrying." We sat on that floor for another hour, just talking, about nothing, about everything, about the life we were going to build together, about how a family isn't always the one you're born into. The wedding was on a Saturday in October. The venue was a restored mill on the edge of town, exposed beams and big windows and light that came through in long gold bars in the afternoon. I had been so careful about every detail. The flowers, white dahlias and eucalyptus, simple. The music, a string quartet for the ceremony. The cake, lemon, my husband's favourite. I had thought of everything except for what I couldn't plan for. I was in the bridal suite getting ready when my maid of honor came in and closed the door behind her with a specific kind of quietness that meant she had something to tell me. She said my sister had been in the main hall for an hour, not just milling around. Positioned was the word she used. Positioned near the entrance, talking to every guest who came in, with the particular warmth of a person who wants to be remembered. My maid of honor said, she told 3 people she was just so happy her sister found someone who could love her like this. She said it like it was a miracle, like you were lucky. I stared at myself in the mirror. I was wearing my dress, ivory satin. I looked, I thought, exactly like myself, the fullest, most put-together version of myself I had ever managed to be. And somewhere in the room beyond that door, my sister was telling our guests to be grateful on my behalf. I went out anyway. I walked with my cane at my pace, with my husband at the end of the aisle, exactly as planned. My parents were seated in the front row on my side, my father in his dark suit, my mother in a pale blue dress she'd bought for the occasion. They had agreed to walk me in, they had agreed weeks ago, and I had been grateful for it. But when the doors opened and I came through on my father's arm, I heard it. Even with the string quartet playing, even with 80 people turning to look, I heard my mother lean toward my father and say, low and tight, she should have let us help her practice that walk. I kept walking. I did not look at her. My husband was at the end of the aisle, and his face. I will spend the rest of my life trying to describe the look on his face when he saw me come through those doors. Like relief, like something he'd been holding for a long time that he could finally put down. Like he was looking at exactly the person he'd been waiting for. I got there. I made it. We stood together in front of our officiant, who was his college roommate and a genuinely funny person, and we were 3 minutes into the ceremony when it happened. The officiant asked if anyone had any objections, which is mostly ceremonial now, which nobody actually does. Except that behind me there was movement, a sound, the way a room shifts when something unexpected is occurring. I turned. My mother had stood up. She didn't shout. She wasn't theatrical about it. She simply stood. And in the silence that followed, she said clearly enough for the front four Rosos to hear, I just want to ask, are you sure? Are you both really sure? Because there are things that maybe haven't been talked about enough. The room went so quiet I could hear the mill's ventilation system. My sister, seated 2 chairs from my mother, did not stand, but she did not look away either. She sat very still in her burgundy dress and looked at the floor, and the particular quality of her stillness told me she had known this was coming, that she had not stopped it. My husband did not turn to look at my mother. He kept his eyes on mine. He held both my hands. He said quietly enough that only I could hear, we don't have to acknowledge this. Say the word and we keep going. I didn't say the word. I turned around. I want to say I had something eloquent prepared. I didn't. I had the truth, which is the only thing that was available to me in that moment. I said, Mom, please sit down. This is my wedding. I love him. He loves me. And nothing you say in the next 30 seconds is going to change either of those things. She stood for another moment. My father, to his credit, in the only act of clarity I can remember him managing in this particular chapter of our lives, put his hand on her arm and said her name once gently, and she sat down. But the moment wasn't over. From the 3rd row on the groom's side, a man stood up. My husband's oldest friend, his best man, a person I had met 6 times before this day, and who I had always thought of as quiet, contained, the type who listened more than he spoke. He was holding a folded piece of paper. He had apparently been holding it through the whole ceremony. He said, I'm sorry, I just need 1 minute. He read from the paper. Not long, maybe a minute and a half. He talked about my husband, about knowing him since they were 19, about watching him date people who were wrong for him, again and again, not because my husband was careless, but because he had a specific kind of goodness that was difficult to match. He said my husband had called him the night we got engaged, not to tell him the news, but to say, I finally feel like I found someone who meets me where I actually am, not where people think I should be. Then he looked at my mother directly, not unkindly, just directly. He said, I don't know what concern just happened, and I'm not going to pretend I understand it. But I've known this man for 12 years, and I've never seen him certain about anything the way he's certain about her. So with respect, please sit down and let them get married. He sat. The room was very still for a moment. Then someone started clapping, my maid of honor, I think, and then the room joined her. My mother did not clap. My sister did, eventually, 2 beats behind everyone else, careful and small, like she was calculating the social cost of not clapping. We got married. The officiant made a gentle joke about unexpected speeches. The tension broke. We said our vows. My husband cried. I cried. His mother cried so loudly we could hear her from the front row, and it was, somehow, exactly what the moment needed. At the reception, I found out what had been behind my mother's objection. It came out in pieces, through the evening, through conversations I wasn't present for but was told about afterward. There is a family trust. My maternal grandmother set it up before she died 6 years ago. The terms, which I had never been told in full, because no one had told me, because apparently this information had been distributed selectively, included a provision tied to marriage. Specifically, the first grandchild to marry received the right to petition for early release of funds intended for a health-related purpose. I have a chronic condition. I have medical expenses. The trust, structured the way it was, would have been meaningful to me, in ways it would not have been meaningful to my sister. My grandmother had known this. She'd set it up that way. My mother had known this too. For 6 years. What she had apparently believed or hoped or told herself, I am still not sure which, was that my sister would marry first, that the window would close before I got there, that the problem would resolve itself. I don't know what she imagined would happen when it didn't. I don't know what the conversation between her and my sister looked like in the weeks before my wedding, whether they had discussed this, whether my sister's persistent interest in my husband had anything to do with some calculation I still can't fully see. I don't know, and I have decided for my own peace that I may never know. What I know is this. My grandmother loved me. She thought of me specifically. She built something into her estate that was designed to help me, and for 6 years it sat waiting while my mother decided who deserved to know about it. The attorney, my husband's uncle, who happened to be at the wedding because he is family, was the one who told me. Quietly, at a corner of the reception, with a glass of sparkling water and a look on his face that suggested he had been waiting for the right moment for some time. He said, Your grandmother was very clear about her intentions. I think you should call my office Monday morning. I called Monday morning. The money wasn't life-changing the way lottery money is life-changing, but it was meaningful. It covered 2 years of specialist appointments I'd been deferring. It paid for the adaptive equipment my insurance had denied 3 times. It was, in the specific and unglamorous way of practical things, exactly what I needed. My mother called me 3 weeks after the wedding. She said she hoped I wasn't angry. She said she'd only wanted what was best for me. She said she'd been worried about my husband for reasons she couldn't fully articulate and was beginning to think maybe she'd been wrong. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said, "I know you love me. I have never doubted that. But I need you to understand that love isn't enough if it keeps showing up as doubt. I can't keep explaining to you that I deserve the life I'm building. I'm not going to." She was quiet. Then she said, "I don't know how to fix this." And I said, "That's something you're going to have to figure out. I'll be here when you do." My sister hasn't called. I'm not waiting. My husband and I spent our honeymoon in a cabin in Vermont, 5 days. No phone signal unless we walked to the top of the hill behind the property. We made breakfast every morning and took long walks and played cards in the evening and talked about the future in the specific concrete way you can talk about it when you've stopped being afraid. On the last night, sitting on the porch in the dark, he said, "Do you think she'll come around? Your mom?" I thought about it for a while. The trees were very still, the stars were out. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not holding the wedding hostage to that answer anymore." He put his arm around me and didn't say anything else. And we sat there until the cold came in and we went inside, and that was enough. That was more than enough. I have spent a long time believing that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally were the authority on whether I was worth loving. I am done with that. I turned 31. I walked down an aisle on my own terms, and I married a man who has never once made me feel like my life was a situation to be managed around. My grandmother knew what she was doing when she wrote that trust. I think she saw something in me. Some stubborn refusal to disappear that she wanted to protect. I think she knew there would be days when I'd need someone in my corner who wasn't standing in the same room. I carry that with me. It turns out that's a kind of inheritance too.